And with that, welcome inside this week opening edition of Big Ten Today. Rick Pizzo, thrilled to be joined by Anthony Herron. And Big Ant, I am generally not a fan of Mondays, but next Monday I'm okay with, because this is the final week that we have to start without the ability to look ahead to Big Ten football being played.
This is week 0. There was one time back in my Iowa days where we played. Week 0 wasn't really a term in the lexicon back then, but we did play in the Eddie Robinson Kickoff Classic back in my senior season. That was the only year where we played a 12-game schedule during my career. Now everyone's playing week 0, 12-game regular season, all this other stuff. But yes, this is the final week without a full slate of games upon us.
There's usually only a 1-week variance at the start of the year, but depending on what we decide to do with the college football playoff, who knows? We're now into late January, maybe into March, maybe competing with the NCAA basketball tournament. We go to 32 teams. Everybody wants to be part of the 12, and according to the AP preseason poll, the Big Ten has a legitimate chance to have multiple teams in this year's college football playoff. In fact, I think we'd all be surprised if there were not at least 2, maybe 3 Big Ten teams as part of this year's 12-team field. You see Ohio State and Oregon ranked 2nd and 3rd, respectively. Penn State and Michigan also inside the top 10. USC and Iowa part of the top 25 as well. So let's start with the conversation about the teams that have a realistic chance of being part of the first ever 12-team playoff. And I think you have to start in Columbus with Ohio State. They don't play a team in September with a winning record. Gets a lot tougher in October when you have to go to Eugene to take on Oregon. But Anthony, regardless of the schedule, it appears that Ohio State has all the pieces to make a run toward the national title.
And to be able to do it in a season with this expanded playoff where there is more margin for error than we're accustomed to for all these teams around the country. And so, we've seen of recent vintage where Ohio State has lost to Oregon early in the season, and then it's brought about a lot of questions about where the remainder of the season would go for the Buckeyes. That's not as much of a concern. It is going to be a huge game when the Bucks go and play the Ducks, but then after that, they still got the rest of conference play to go. So the story of the season won't be told just from any one individual contest because of the expanded playoff. But when you're talking national championship, it is going to be fun to watch 2 of the top teams in America do battle, and Ohio State, certainly one of the ones who is chief amongst that conversation.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation with Ross Dellinger last week. He's like, everybody wants to be part of the top 4 because you get a first-round bye, but that means you don't get to play a playoff game in your home stadium. How cool would it be for Ohio State to have a home game inside the Horseshoe? There's a schedule that we referenced, but it's really not, I don't think, for this Ohio State team about who you're playing. It's about how you're playing, because when you are as loaded as Ohio State is, whether it's the running back room with Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, the wide receivers with Ibuka and Carnell Tate, and a young man who I think everybody believes will come in and be an automatic impact player, and that defense that returns so many starters who could have been part of the NFL draft. Honestly and personally, I will be shocked if this team is not still playing in mid-January.
I agree. And all the roster additions you reference are huge. But then also you think about the fact they've added Chip Kelly to this coaching staff. That may be the biggest acquisition out of any that we're discussing in Columbus. And not just how it works out schematically for the Buckeyes, because Ryan Day, he's already been able to coach, to lead, to call plays for many of the top offenses in college football in the time that he's been in Columbus. But you think about some of the in-game moments, some of those 4th down decisions. Does he go for it or does he not? Which play ends up getting called? That's been as much of the scrutiny that's been there for Ryan Day and how he's managed.
He's had to deal with both those decisions.
Exactly. So now Chip Kelly's there and he can take some of that load off his plate. Not only the play that gets called, but with Ryan Day not having to call the play, he can maybe just make as informed a decision as he's been capable of making at any point that he's been here. That's what having Chip Kelly in there does. You don't only add one of the top offensive minds, but having a trusted play caller in there. Now that's where those moments in game are critical. So to be that CEO, Ryan Day should be able to handle those moments as well as he ever has.
Jim Knowles, the DC, says, I see your comment on the addition of Chip Kelly on the offensive side, and I raise you Caleb Downs in my secondary. That Ohio State back 4 is going to be absolutely nasty. And by the way, the front 7 is pretty good as well. They will get a big-time test on the road against Oregon. Oregon is a team that has done nothing but win under Dan Lanning, one of, if not the most impressive under 40-year-old coaches that I've ever met in my career covering college football, college sports in general. Oregon, certainly a team with Dylan Gabriel, with what they have in the backfield, with what they do defensively, that we also expect to be part of the playoff.
And I believe that when you look at the Ducks, the fact that they've won at a high level in the first couple of seasons Dan Lanning has been there, but they haven't been over that championship hump, then that should provide that locker room that additional bit of fuel where they can't feel like they're complacent. They can't feel too comfortable going into this year because not only are they joining a new league and a new conference, but there are still higher heights for them to climb. But there is this conversation around Oregon football that sort of has them, I guess, in some ways being viewed amongst the 1%ers of the sport as though they have won a championship in recent years. And, previous regime did do that, but Dan Lanning hasn't gotten that done yet in a couple of seasons in Eugene. So I do believe that'll be a part of the message to his players to recognize the opportunity is there, but they haven't gotten it done yet. That's where that extra little force and focus needs to come from for Oregon. And they've got all the tools. They've got all the pieces available to them. And you referenced certainly what's their quarterback, but playmakers around Dylan Gabriel will be a huge part of it as well.
I also think I love the way that their schedule does sit up. You kind of get, no offense to UCLA and Michigan State, but you get slightly warmed up in Big Ten play. Your first Big Ten game is not a long road trip. It's down to LA, and then Michigan State goes to Eugene. Ohio State goes to Eugene to start the year. So I know coaches don't necessarily like to look at a schedule and say, boy, this sets up really well for me. But Anthony, I got to tell you, this sets up really well for Oregon.
I think it sets up really well for the Ducks. I understand the points you're making. I'm picking up what you're putting down. And especially when you just think about what Autzen Stadium is. When you have big games
it's so
in Eugene,
good.
It's just a special place for college football. And there's going to be a lot of Big Ten fans who get the opportunity to get introduced to it on this network, on other networks, and certainly hoping that all the Big Ten fans will have the opportunity to travel out there as well because of what it represents, not only to those Ducks fans, but they're one of the programs here that really in recent decades have come into the fore as one of the elite brands in the sport. But there's still a lot of the country that hasn't gotten to experience that. So I'm really excited to see what that represents, and especially with big games that are going to be there for a team in the championship conversation with a quarterback and with playmakers like Terrence Ferguson as a tight end. His stature, his size, his playmaking ability, he's all Pac-12. They've got several returning starters on the offensive line. So Dylan Gabriel is bolstered by experience and playmaking ability and other talent that have commanded the big stage for the Ducks before. There's a lot that coalesces for Oregon this season that feel like they're going to be on the cusp of something special.
And I think a huge edge for Oregon, much like for Ohio State. You have two guys in the backfield that can do it for Ohio State. You have two guys for Oregon. Jordan James jumps off the page, but Noah Whittington is a really talented back who got hurt early last year. Otherwise, I think they would have shared a lot more carries, and I think Dan Lanning has the ability to do that. And speaking of teams with a two-headed running back monster, we also have to discuss Penn State. I've said many times, and I believe it's true, maybe the best recruiting job that James Franklin has done in his Penn State career is finding a way to keep Katron Allen and Nick Singleton in State College, because either guy could have gone anywhere else that they wanted and been option 1A in the backfield. You look at the development of Drew Aller, what he could potentially be this year under a new OC, and you just wonder, is this finally the year that Penn State doesn't just win 10 games, doesn't just get to a quality bowl game, but actually finds a way to beat the Ohio States, to beat the toughest teams on their schedule?
And not having to face all of those teams in the regular season is certainly a huge boost to the chances for Penn State this year. I think the expectations for the folks in State College feel a little bit more muted this season than they did going into last year because of the fact that the offense wasn't as explosive. There weren't as many chunk plays for the Nittany Lions on offense as what a lot of folks anticipated. But you talk about the backfield with Singleton and Allen, the quarterback position with Aller, you add in wide receiver talent that's there now as well. There's a lot that goes around. So if you see a step forward, if you see enhanced development for Penn State, there's no reason to think they won't be in the thick of that conversation as well. It's one of the things that's intriguing about their opening game. I don't think West Virginia is going to be a national championship
No, but
contender.
I think that's a big barometer for the season.
Kind of like, going to Auburn on the road at Jordan-Hare Stadium in recent years and seeing what that game represented, them dominating, taking that game over in the second half. We've seen Penn State show the ability to do that, and it's going to be a hostile environment.
But you know what you don't see on that schedule? Yes, Ohio State's there. You don't see Michigan.
Right.
You don't see Oregon on that schedule as well. Yes, you have to go to LA to face USC. But again, it is sometimes in this new look Big Ten about the rotation and the teams you don't play, and where you play the best teams. But for me, it comes down to Drew Aller. I think he is a young man who physically has every tool in the box, right? Yeah. You look at him, he can make every throw, his size. He is a pro-ready quarterback in every single area, except the fact that they really haven't let him throw the ball down the field. And part of that is because they haven't had the explosives on the outsides and the guys that can do it. But if they can just find that, Anthony, I think this guy has the ability to show off something that we haven't seen yet in his Penn State career.
And you wonder, in addition to just the schematics of it, does Andy Kotelnicki come in and infuse a little bit of, or maybe diminish the risk-averse nature
I think you have to.
That Drew Aller played with last season? It's great that he protected the football at a high level for a first-year starter, but there are times where you do need to be willing to take a risk. Give your playmakers opportunities, even in contested situations, to go up and get the football, to make a big-time grab. That wasn't necessarily something Drew Aller seemed as comfortable with last season. It served Penn State well. They led the Big Ten in rushing, led the Big Ten in scoring.
It was forever until he threw a pick.
Yeah, I mean, they had a good offense, but Penn State is judged by a different standard. We're comparing them with the best teams in America, the teams of national championship caliber. That's where sometimes you have to sort of calculate when that risk is necessary. And the confidence doesn't only have to come from his OC and the schematics of that offense, but knowing he's got a defense that's going to get it done at a really high level. Up front, at linebacker, on the back end.
Can you say Abdul Carter?
I mean, everywhere on the field.
He's the star, but everywhere on that defensive side.
Yes, I mean, Denai Dennis Sutton is the next star on the opposite edge from them as well. The back end, this is kind of the golden age of secondary play in State College as well. They've never had a stretch this deep, this talented year over year with DBs going to the league, high draft picks. So that defense, even if the offense does have the occasional flub, will get them out of jeopardy time and time again.
So who knows, to paraphrase James Franklin, maybe 2024 is the year that Penn State goes from good to great to elite. It seems like yesterday, and yet it seems so long ago, Michigan was raising the championship trophy. J.J. McCarthy and company, of course, Jim Harbaugh, no longer there. Sharon Moore was a huge part of it. He is now the head coach of the Wolverines as they start the post-Jim Harbaugh era, also post-J.J. McCarthy and post-Blake Corum. Right. I could go on and on, yet the Wolverines are still getting a ton of respect. They are top 10 AP preseason. Rick Pizzo back with Anthony Herron. Are we to believe that this team, and it is a little bit, I hate to use the phrase rebuild, but in terms of a roster, I think it's closer to that than it is a reload, especially on the offensive side. Is this still a team that, if it plays to its potential, could make the college football playoff now that it's a 12-team field?
Yes, I believe so, but it's
There's
more...
a little bit of a but in the way that you said that.
Because it's more conjecture. There aren't as many proven commodities in Ann Arbor as we're accustomed to, as we've seen in recent years, where there were just so many seasons where they had multi-year starters at every position, the O-line,
and an offensive line that was so
quarterback.
good every year.
Right, and so every report that I'm hearing out of Ann Arbor, every beat writer I'm talking to is saying the O-line looks fantastic again this season. So no reason to think we won't see another Joe Moore Award-worthy offensive line in Ann Arbor this season. But it is different. We haven't seen those five guys take the field and dominate together yet. So it's a bit unproven. We haven't seen Donovan Edwards be the main rock toter for a full year. Yes, we've seen games and flashes and highlights. But as far as being the guy the program has to count on every single week, we haven't seen that yet. We have no idea who's going to start at quarterback and how that individual will perform behind center, whereas we've seen over two different QBs in the last 3 years, Big Ten championship play from that position. So there's just a lot that's unproven in Ann Arbor right now. So yes, there's no reason to doubt that the defending national champions would be in the mix, but there's a little bit of trepidation, a little bit of uncertainty for what that means.
Well, and I also think that last year that offense was such a proven commodity that they could rely on that even if they didn't have the best defensive performance, which they did. I'm not trying to say that wasn't the case. And I don't think, yes, they lost some important guys in the defense. I just think the way it's been built for the last 5-7 years, that defense is not going to miss much of a beat. And I think you played, obviously, on that D-line. Sometimes it's easier, it's more instinctual on the defensive side to just read and react and play. My concern does come on the offensive side. You mentioned Donovan Edwards. bursts, but has never been the guy, has always had kind of that added role, great pass catcher out of the backfield. I think Colston Loveland is arguably the best tight end in the country, but it's all those surrounding pieces that makes me wonder, can this offense do everything it needs against that schedule to be part of the 12?
One of the things I was talking about late last week, I was sitting here with Kylan Mills, and I was making the point that Colston Loveland could be the key cog in adding comfort to the quarterback position for a team in the Big Ten championship picture. And that's going to be really necessary regardless of who's behind center for the Wolverines. But then that defense, like you referenced as well, having Mason Graham up front, having Kenneth Grant there, so the interior of that D-line, extremely formidable. Will Johnson on the back end. They've got playmakers, but it's not across the board of proven commodities, even on the defensive side of the football. Wink Martindale comes in. It's been a while since he coached in college football, but we know he can coach defense at a high level, a very aggressive philosophy that he brings over there as well. So there's a lot to be confident in and comfortable. But even the schedule, early in the season, Michigan's schedule is not sort of this easy on-ramp like we've seen in recent years.
No, they had one of the easiest non-conference schedules in the country a year ago. They start with Fresno State and Texas. Is the second game, excuse me, of the year for the Wolverines. So you're going to know right away if this Michigan team is good to go. Let's talk about your alma mater, because I think Iowa may be the most fascinating team in the country this year. I'm not just saying in the conference. We know what the defense is going to bring you. Tim Lester comes in. How much different does the offense look? And the bigger question, and a question we didn't think we would be asking 2 weeks ago, who's going to be running the offense? Because a lot of on-site reports are that Brendan Sullivan, the former Northwestern QB, has looked much better than Cade McNamara, who is, of course, returning from a serious injury.
I was just talking to Scott Dochterman from The Athletic.
Yeah, we talked to them last week, too.
Yeah, I mean, he's as dialed into this program and college football in general as anyone. He's right now still under the impression Cade McNamara has the inside track on the starting QB position, but at least Brendan Sullivan is doing what Iowa was hopeful that he would be capable of doing. Look like a more than competent player if they need to make a move, if they needed to transition at QB. It's been 2 years since Cade McNamara has been able to maintain health during a season anyway.
It's a legitimate issue.
Right, and if for some reason Cade McNamara's performance warrants moving on, you have someone who's been able to do it at a high level in Big Ten play in Brendan Sullivan. And yes, he hasn't been a first-team All-Big Ten QB, but I've called games where Brendan Sullivan has lit up the opposing offense.
The best player on the field.
Exactly. So, I mean, you have that available, the quarterback position, more insulated in Iowa City than it's been in years. And they're a program that more than any other program in the country has proven to be QB-proof. So that's a great thing for them. If you get any more out of the quarterback, then Iowa is right there in the thick of the college football playoff convo.
Any more, if you get anything out of that quarterback last year, I mean, this team defensively was historically good. They just need to be, I mean, you give me average, you give Tim Lester and Phil Parker average this year at the quarterback position, slightly above average. I may be on board with what I think by you is a sleeper pick. Rutgers is also a sleeper pick. But it's funny because the Scarlet Knights have kind of become a trendy pick among college football insiders after being beaten down the last couple of years as they kind of started the year, or the second stint, I should say, under Greg Schiano. Now you have Kyle Monungai, who's finally getting the respect he deserves. You have a massive amount of returning production, veteran leadership. But much like Iowa, the question is, do they have a quarterback? And now it's Ethan Kaliakmanis, a former Minnesota Gopher, that can give them enough offensively that this team could threaten for the playoff. Because I love, and I mean love with a capital L, the schedule that the Scarlet Knights will play this year.
And Ethan Kaliakmanis is just the latest of what's been several quarterbacks in the coaching tenure of Kirk Ciarrocca at multiple institutions that have just played their best football with Kirk Ciarrocca as their OC.
And have struggled when he wasn't the OC.
Exactly, yeah. So it just shows how he enhances the comfort, the productivity of the certain quarterbacks that he's been able to work with at multiple spots. And so Rutgers fans hoping that Ethan Kaliakmanis is just the latest example of that, where he gets back to playing at an extremely high level because he's going to be with a program that's been building and with an OC that really knows his skill set, that he trusts at a really high level. And even back at Minnesota, I mean, we have both talked to PJ Fleck a bunch. They were really high on what Ethan Kaliakmanis was capable of. but it just never really came to fruition on a consistent basis. I was frankly surprised he was able to beat out Gavin Wimsatt so quickly for the quarterback position because the productivity between the two of them was really fairly similar last year. So it just shows Kyle McManus showed up, knew exactly what to do, how to do it, and did it at a high level for Schiano to make that decision.
And I know that Rutgers may have a great year, and people may say, well, it's the schedule. They only have one, I believe, opponent that is ranked in the preseason in the top 25 on their schedule. You don't play Ohio State, you don't play Michigan, you don't play Penn State, you don't play Oregon. I understand that. But if this team does what I think it's capable of doing, and I'll go on record by saying I think they could win 9 games this year. Yeah. I wouldn't be blown away if they play their best ball if they were able to get to double digits. I don't care who you play. If you get to 9 or 10 wins in this conference this year, you have done an amazing job coaching and playing football.
Greg Schiano's been talking for multiple seasons at this point that this is the season he feels like he's been building the program towards, this developmental program. And, programs like Rutgers and Iowa and Minnesota with so much talent that returns. I know in the transfer portal and NIL era, the conversation turns into just thinking that, the big boys come and pluck up the talent from everyone else. There are guys who return to Piscataway for this season and this opportunity. They seemed as dialed in and as focused as can be. And yes, we could certainly have a conversation about USC as well for the college football playoff possibilities. But I wanted to make sure we got Rutgers in because I didn't want to be sitting here in November with Rutgers having an amazing run and not be able to say, I told you so.
Well, and all those guys that came back, it's very similar to Michigan last year. A lot of those guys could have been gone, but they knew what they had and they came back feeling. Now, I'm not going to go on record right now and say Rutgers is going to win the national championship.
Rutgers is Michigan.
Like I did about Michigan a year ago, but there are some similarities to be made. Oh, the only man in history with a couple of Heismans is being immortalized outside the stadium where he worked his magic. Ohio State set to unveil a statue of the legend Archie Griffin on August 30th to commemorate the 50th anniversary of his first Heisman. Griffin will also dot the I when the Ohio State marching band performs Script Ohio at halftime of its season opener. Archie also one of the truly great human beings on the planet. You get to talk with him. He is just a nice, humble. You would have no idea that he was a world beater for a couple of years in college football and a wonderful representative for not just Ohio State, but for college football as a sport.
I wonder if anyone's dotted the I more than Archie has. Just over the years in the history of the program, it's such an honor. It's got so much prestige.
Yeah, well, there's not a lot of folks right outside the band that have been allowed to do it. I mean, Archie, I think Jack Nicklaus, John Glenn, and very, very few people. It is an unbelievable honor if you are a Buckeye or even just an Ohio native. Speaking of Ohio Buckeyes, Ohio State Buckeyes, we're going to start our conversation about underclassmen that can make a huge difference in 2024 with a young man who came in as the #1 prospect in the class, not at his position, at any position. Jeremiah Smith, wide receiver, and all reports early on from his time in Columbus is that this guy is going to be, and you hate to label anyone like this, but he is going to be the next Jackson Smith and Jigba. He is going to be the next Marvin Harrison. He has all the measurables, and we know he has the play caller and the offensive coaching acumen to get him there.
What I love about his game, and I got to see him in San Antonio for the All-American Bowl. I've been calling that game for a number of years. And his physical, attributes are off the charts. There's no doubt about that between the size, the speed. But there's a competitive DNA to Jeremiah Smith that shows up in between the white lines. He's not this outsized personality when he's not on the field. He's very composed, in some ways even quiet. But you get him on the field, and especially if somebody else starts talking some smack, Jeremiah Smith lights up and then lights up the opponent as well. So I cannot wait to see him in Big Ten competition.
That's funny because you're talking about, or I was, the physical comparisons with Smith and Jigba and Harrison. That's also exactly how they were personality-wise, both those guys.
Yeah, and even just to see, physically his stature looks a little bit like Marvin Harrison Jr., but then also his movement skills, can remind you a little bit more of JSN. He's got size, but he's also got fluidity to the way he can move. He's got really quiet hands, and so that maturation process that he's already been through at the high school level will show up quickly at the collegiate level.
All right, different physical skill set for a guy at the same position in Zachariah Branch from USC. Now, last year he burst onto the scene as more of a return guy. We absolutely expect that this year his wide receiver role expands. He is dynamic. He is lightning fast. You get a chance to watch him as a Big Ten football fan now, watching USC inside this conference. You're going to see one of the most exciting players in all of college football.
And in talking to Lincoln Riley a couple of weeks ago in Indianapolis for media days, spent some time talking to him about his quarterback, Miller Moss, stylistically, perhaps being a bit different than what they've come accustomed to with Caleb Williams, not necessarily in production, but just in style of play, the rhythm that the passing attack would have. And so that's where the development of Zachariah Branch will be huge, because for him, developing as a wide receiver, being where he needs to be, when he needs to be there, if they can count on him to be where Miller Moss needs him to be, then there's no reason to think the volume of catches, the volume of touches for Zachariah Branch can have him perhaps of All-American acclaim this season, because he is such a playmaker. He is so explosive in open spaces. And Lincoln Riley is accustomed to getting playmakers in the open field. And when Zach Branch is there, man, you're putting 6 on the board.
All right, let's go to the Twin Cities and talk about a Minnesota running back that has shown us glimpses. We know what he can do when he's healthy. The question is, with so much focus, I think, this year on that Minnesota run game from opposing defenses, they're going to say, Darius Taylor, you are not going to beat us. He is going to run up against the kind of stuff that I think Kyle Monungai is going to run up against this year. A lot of 8-man boxes, but he's shown us he can still do it.
And Minnesota's offense has shown they're willing to be stubborn in running the football.
Run it anyway.
They're willing to just turn it around and hand it off over and over again. And if there's growth on the defensive side of the football for the Gophers, then that should still be, put them in a competent situation for how they can move the ball and put points on the board. And Darius Taylor, between the combination of power that he showcases, vision that went beyond his years last season as a freshman, and the way the program will need to be able to count on him, really the main thing he needs to continue to improve on. And I believe his physical maturity will bring about more durability with the way he's able to play the game, because P.J. Fleck will ask a lot of the running back position. He will have an individual get it over and over again, and as long as they show they can handle it, he doesn't mind you getting 25, 30, 35 carries. So Darius Taylor better be in shape, because when he gets the football, he's going to be as impressive as any running back in this conference.
That's been a hallmark of Minnesota, even before P.J. Fleck and Jerry Kill and David Cobb. I mean, running the football 35, 40 times a game. This is just what this program does right now. Their best years, though, are when they can mix the run and the pass, like they did with the year that Tanner Morgan had all those outstanding wide receivers, and Minnesota had one of the best years in program history. Aiden Childs is going to be an interesting player to watch. Very familiar with Jonathan Smith, comes with him from Oregon State. And I think we're going to see a very different kind of Michigan State offense, especially with what Childs can provide in a couple of different fashions at the quarterback position.
I'll be really intrigued by how they go about navigating that as well, because I know Jonathan Smith and his OC, Brian Lindgren, are very excited about what Aiden Childs brings to the table, but they don't necessarily have a wealth of playmakers on the outside. There's certainly some, but in the end, how much do you put not only on the quarterback, but on the passing attack in general? What I love, though, is that Aiden Childs is very comfortable. He's very confident in his skills, and if things are going well, he handles it at a high level. If things aren't going that well, he seems to have showcased the fortitude to be able to work through and work beyond that, not get, sort of too disjointed or disappointed with what's going on. And it's a program that in year one under Jonathan Smith, with a lot of players who don't know him, haven't been through anything difficult with the new head coach yet, to have a player like Aiden Childs at quarterback that can step forward as a leader to sort of showcase that trust in the head coach will be key for Michigan State. He is more than capable of doing that. And oh, by the way, he is so talented as a passer. I'm really excited. I'm going to get to call 2 of his games early in the season, both week 2 and week 3.
I know you're going to be really disappointed because we're out of time. We can't talk about the last guy that was on your list.
Are you kidding me?
No, I know. And I know you love...
Seriously?
I know you love the guys.
No, we have to have time. We have to have time to talk about the Iowa punter, because if there are any shoes bigger to fill in this conference, they belong to the punter position in Iowa City.
Anthony just hijacked the show.
Tory Taylor, I told you last season, the Iowa punter, Tory Taylor, should have been in the Heisman Trophy conversation. I sat right here at this desk and said, a different studio, but it's the same desk. Now, Reese Dakin gets an opportunity to step into those magnificent shoes of the Iowa punter from the same region of the globe in Melbourne, Australia, and he has got even a bigger leg than Tory Taylor. We will see if the accuracy is there, but everything I'm hearing out of Iowa City is that the way Reese Dagan handles himself is extremely impressive. The way he would be put at times in difficult positions. They have no concerns for what the punter will bring to the table. Melbourne has been the proving ground for punters in college football and punters in Iowa City. They've got another special one on the way.
I'm going to apologize to our producer Pavlos on Anthony's behalf. We probably just lost some advertising dollars. If it comes out of his paycheck, you're writing him the big
punters.
number.
Punting is winning.
A few of the guys we just discussed. You can go ahead and roll the break video while Anthony's still talking. According to Pro Football Focus, the Big Ten has 3 of the top 7 running back rooms in the country. Ohio State ranked number 1, Penn State at number 4, Oregon at number 7. We have discussed how all of those teams have multiple running backs that can do the job. Excited to see all of them this year in the new look Big Ten. They are part of a Big Ten that offers a lot of different offensive units that should be among the best in the country. We're going to start with Ohio State at the running back position because Travion Henderson is back, trying to stay healthy, and he has some help in that regard because Quinshon Judkins comes as one of the highest-rated transfers in all of college football.
And each of these guys individually could be worthy of Heisman Trophy acclaim. That's what makes this backfield so special. Yes, there's a lot of deep backfields in the Big Ten Conference. We showcased Penn State and Oregon in that convo. The backfield in Iowa City is really deep and loaded as well. But when you talk about which team has multiple backs that can do it at a special level. When Travion Henderson got back healthy for Ohio State in the month of November last year, he looked like a Heisman-worthy performer. And Quinshon Judkins is a very similar degree of talent. And the wiggle he has in the hole, the explosion that he showcases in space, they are a touchdown waiting to happen. Defenders just with tail lights in their wake every time either one of them touches the football. And they've got a play caller in Chip Kelly who's as creative as any run game mind we've seen. So I think that combination puts them in great shape.
Meanwhile, for Oregon, Dillon Gabriel comes in, obviously, after a terrific career at Oklahoma. You lose Bo Nix. What happens? You bring in one of the most productive quarterbacks in all of college football. And that room is going to be really intriguing to watch and how it affects what Oregon can do offensively this year.
I like the way that Dillon Gabriel has commanded big stages before, been statistically spectacular every other place he's been, his third different school. But if for some reason Dillon Gabriel got banged up, if for some reason Dillon Gabriel was just going to be in the midst of a QB rotation, I love what they have available as a backup as well in Dante Moore. And so that gives the coaching staff, it gives Will Stein some freedom to say if we want to occasionally on like a 3rd and short or on a 4th down to run the QB, they have the freedom to do that because they know Dante Moore is an extremely gifted talent they'll have behind him.
And I think it says a lot about Moore. Started his career at UCLA as a highly rated guy, understands unless Gabriel gets hurt, he's probably not going to play much this year, but then it is there for him in the next couple of years for the remainder of his college eligibility. Let's go back to your alma mater, tight end U. Iowa has become A.J. Hawkinson, George Kittle. We could go on and on with the list. But the young man that's there right now, Luke Lachey, I know a lot of the coaches believe, at least in college, he's even further ahead skill set-wise than George Kittle was. Kittle has obviously continued to develop in the NFL at a ludicrous rate.
Yeah, he doesn't have bad for himself. But Luke Lachey, in returning from the injury after last season, has continued to hone his body, to hone his skills. He's as mentally and physically mature as you could hope for a tight end to be. And you have to be that within the Iowa offense. That's what separates Lachey from some of his other counterparts in the conference. I mean, Colston Loveland certainly in an offense that asked him to block as well. But not only do I love Luke Lachey and what he's capable of in Iowa City, but you've also got Addison Ostrenga, who's a backup who, because of all the injuries to Eric All, Luke Lachey, and others last year, Addison Ostrenga, as a really young football player, had to step in last season, and he performed at a high level. He's got exceptional hands, can catch the ball away from his frame, a more than willing blocker as well. And the way that Iowa utilizes the tight ends in their offense, you get to see the entire scope of their skills. They've even got a guy in Hayden Large who could be a really high-level starting tight end. They've started to use him as a fullback just because they have this embarrassment of riches at tight end, and they want big, physical, versatile bodies on the field, and they've got a bunch of them in Iowa City.
Lastly, Minnesota's offensive line has become a position of strength in recent years, and that is credit to P.J. Fleck, because if you remember, when he took over, they couldn't even scrimmage in spring ball because they didn't have enough offensive linemen on scholarship or healthy enough on the roster to do so.
And now they're putting guys into the NFL almost on an annual basis after the program went years without being able to do that. at a high level. They've got 4 out of their 5 starters at return from last season, and we've been talking about the mentality that they attack their game plans with. They want to be able to lean on that offensive line, and Max Brosman transfers in as a quarterback. Part of what made him comfortable to do so was knowing that Minnesota is not a program that's going to put the entire offense on his shoulders. That O-line is what everyone will lean on. That run game, led by Darius Taylor, who we discussed a moment ago, will be what's the engine for the Gophers, and having experience up front, it matters more to Minnesota football than any other program in this conference.
4 starters back on that O-line for the Gophers as they get set to head into 2024. Take one final break here on Big Ten Today. We're back with a look at which assistants are the ultimate adds to their respective coaching staffs and an exclusive interview with first-year Iowa OC Tim Lester. The AVCA preseason top 25 volleyball poll has been released. How about the Big Ten with 5 teams inside the top 10? Nebraska at 2, Wisconsin at 3, Penn State, Purdue, Oregon also inside the top 10. Minnesota and USC each received top 25 votes. Back to football, and as you look at the list of notable coordinator changes in the league, perhaps none jumps off the page quite like Tim Lester. New Iowa OC now in charge of a unit that has struggled mightily in recent years and now has an unexpected preseason QB competition. Our training camp crew is in Iowa City over the weekend and had the chance to sit down with Coach Lester.
Great to see you, and thanks for spending some time with us. I want to ask you, obviously, what you've learned about this offense, but let's start with you personally. What has the transition been like, and what have you learned about this program since coming here?
It's been a great transition, unbelievable coaching staff, Coach Ferentz, and the way he just handles all of us. And I've been learning a ton watching him be head coach and as a former head coach, and it's been fun taking notes. And, we have a long way to go. It's been fun, hungry group of offensive players that really want to improve, and we're throwing a lot of new stuff at them. Pretty much everything's new, and they've been doing a good job. We're getting a little bit better every day.
Yeah, Le'Shawn Williams was saying how fun and exciting this offense is, and he said he's really enjoying learning it. A lot of different motions. What can Hawkeye fans expect? What does a Tim Lester offense look like?
Well, I mean, our goal is to run the ball, be balanced, and find explosive plays. And that's we've been running the ball well. We haven't been finding as many explosive plays as we need to, but when you can run the ball, it makes that part of the offense way easier to do. So you can't put the cart before the horse, and we're in the process. We're probably going to grow as the season goes, but I just like the way they're showing up and attacking every day, and so we've been improving just because of their effort.
Where are you at the quarterback position?
Well, the 2 guys have been battling, Cade and Sully. Cade's really had a good week this week. He kind of went through ups and downs coming back from a knee injury. Everyone knows kind of how that goes, of confidence in the pocket, bodies falling all around you. Was a little skittish early, calmed down. He's better in phase 2, moving around the pocket now. And Sully's natural in the pocket, and he's played both have played a bunch of Big Ten football games, and so that's a huge advantage. And so it's been fun. I think they both make each other better, and we got a long way to go, but and I coach them. But we have to be better than we were today, at least, and continue to improve.
I'm sure you've been involved in other quarterback battles. So what's the tiebreaker quality when they're really close? I mean, not necessarily these 2 guys, just in general coaching a quarterback. What is the separator?
Really 3 things. One would be their feet. Can they operate the offense on time and in rhythm? Some guys have a strong enough arm that they can be late and they'll fit a couple in, but when you go against good defense, that's a pick 6. You better go tackle someone, right? That's 1. 2 is who can take care of the ball naturally in practice. If some guys just finding ways to turn the ball over, that's the other thing. And the last thing, the thing I enjoy is I love watching. I actually asked Coach Ford earlier last week, is you put the 2s versus the 1s and the 1s versus the 2s. And I love a quarterback that can take the 2s with technically inferior athletes and find a way to get first downs against the 1s, make the people around you better. And the 1 guy's supposed to go down and score when in that scenario. And so we've done that a little bit just to see who can handle themselves when they're kind of outmatched. And your job is to move the ball, matriculate the ball down the field. No one's going to remember how it got happened. If the ball's moving, people will remember you. So those are the 3 things, and we're in the middle of it, but it's been fun to watch.
I think the toughest job in college football is the play caller on Saturday. I think it's harder than what the head coach does or anyone else does. Will the Iowa fans see something dramatically different, a little bit different? Will it be carryover from what they've done in the past? Obviously, you want to be better. You always want to be better.
Yeah, I think the schemes are the same, right? There's only so many schemes that you have. There's counter, there's power, there's Stanley. I mean, all the normal run plays, stretch, inside zone. It's just how you get to them and how you present the plays, right? And that's something that this offense has always done a really good job on. So I think if you get on the PFF world, I think we were one of the most stagnant offenses. We didn't motion much. I'm willing to bet that will look a lot different now, as far as just trying to, change the defensive keys, change their fits, and try to mess with their eyes as much as humanly possible. But once we snap the ball, we're running one of those plays, and so that part is a huge change for the offensive line because the guys are going to be moving at the snap. Big change for the receivers. I think they run as much before the play as they do sometimes during the play. And they've really, welcomed this offense in and been getting better at it every single day.
There's also a change in the rules, and you think about what the green dot and the player, coach-to-player communication in the game. I'm sure there's some nuances because you kind of have to learn and what the guys like, how you're going to operate it. So just can you give us a little insight into how you're practicing that and what your philosophy will be and how much that changes things?
Yeah, believe it or not, it changes us zero. When I got here, my biggest concern for my first 2 weeks on the job, first 2 weeks of February, was how am I going to run this without being able to communicate with the quarterback like we did in Green Bay. And then they passed it. I think I'd rather be lucky than anything. And when they passed, it really took everything out of all the how are we going to signal this in, how are we going to get all these motion and put signals to them. And now I can just talk to them. So it was kind of ironic that happened 2 weeks into me getting this job. We have enough to do as far as getting our players doing the things we need to do. So it was good that some of the logistical headaches were erased when they allowed us to do this coach to player communication.
They heard you wanted it, so they made it happen. 2 weeks, not bad.
That.
All right, Coach, we appreciate your time. Thanks so much, and best of luck this season.
Thank you.
Thanks, Coach.
Ashley Adamson, Jerry DiNardo with Tim Lester, Rick Pizzo, Anthony Herron back in studio for a few more minutes. We'll get to some offensive coordinator changes in just a second, but let's start with a returning defensive coordinator and a guy in Brian Williams who has really put his mark on the Maryland defense in a couple of years as the guy in charge of that D.
It was a defense that was really struggling in College Park when Brian Williams first became the defensive play caller. It was a decision that Mike Locksley made during a season, late in the year, just a few seasons ago. And you saw Brian Williams immediately make an impact there, and season over season, this Maryland defense has turned into one of the most formidable in the Big Ten. What they do up front in hitting blocks, the versatility of how they roam pre-snap at the linebacker position, and consistently putting DBs into the National Football League. He understands within the game what the defense needs and what his players will benefit from in certain key and critical moments. But on the whole, he also just brings aggression to things schematically. So his team really seems to feed off of his leadership style.
Meanwhile, Dan Lynn is not new to the D.C. position. He's not even new to L.A. He just went from one L.A. school to the other. And I know that Lincoln Riley believes he may be one of, if not the biggest additions to the USC program this year, and that includes players on the roster.
They stole him from the in-city rival, and it was worth it. I mean, this is a USC defense that needs the benefits of a better defensive mind, a greater defensive scheme for the Trojans. We're confident. We're all confident that USC is going to find a way to score points, that their offense is going to be in great position going into this regular season. There's usually talent there. And this is a story that's been going on for a while with USC. They normally have talent, high-level recruits on defense. Can someone coach them up well enough to actually make it a consistent production on that side of the football? That's going to be the task for Danton Lynn. And if he does, man, the sky's the limit for this program.
Another guy helping us feel really old covered his college career at Penn State in the early stages of the Big Ten Network. Tony White's made a huge difference with that Husker defense. They always want to be known as the Black Shirts. It's been tradition, but he came in and installed a very non-traditional technique, and it has worked in Lincoln.
It really have with the 4-2-5 and the way that his defense, you think about all the talent that perhaps could have been snatched up to go elsewhere in the portal or beyond. They stayed there. They stayed there for Matt Rule on defense. They stayed there for Tony White on defense. They stayed there for this opportunity to get Nebraska's team as a whole back to the level that Huskers fans anticipate that it should be. And he got overtures over the offseason. You talk about folks who came back to Lincoln. Tony White was getting pursued by other football programs to maybe become a head coach. He decided to return for another season as well. So it just shows the investment that's there, and he's a huge key in why.
You mentioned how excited you are to watch Aiden Childs this year. What does Brian Lindgren, the OC from Michigan State, provide for an offense that needs a little bit of a spark?
Well, Lindgren has been with Jonathan Smith for a number of seasons at multiple stops at this point. And one thing I love is that there's an anticipation that the guy coming from the West Coast and the Pac-12 coordinator and play caller maybe would come in opening things up a lot. They'll certainly do that because Aiden Child's a talented QB, but you're going to be really impressed with the run game. Michigan State fans will know that this is a physical football team. And a lot of it is because of the way Brian Lindgren is able to scheme up the run. And it's not because there's a bunch of window dressing with it at all times, but the way he teaches the outside zone run scheme, the path of the back, the unified way that the offensive line operates, and at times, frankly, just the stubbornness that they operate with. It sets up easy reads and drop-down coverage for the quarterbacks, where now the field on the third level will be more open to the way they can attack vertically, but the run game is where it starts, and that's one of those things that Brian Lindgren, I don't think, has been appreciated enough about his other stops.
Should be interesting to see exactly how they use Aiden Childs this year. You brought up the fact that they have to figure out what their offensive identity wants to be. Also don't want to put too much on that defense. Yeah. I think the good news for Jonathan Smith, unlike maybe some of the other new hires, I think the expectations are realistic for right now. They understand it's going to be a little bit of a build before the Michigan State Spartans are getting back to that championship level inside the Big Ten. For Anthony Herron, I'm Rick Pizzo as we wrap up this edition of Big Ten Today. Hope to see you again on Tuesday.